Hello, my name is Matthew Kuizon, and today my presentation topic is called Triadic Relations and Epistemology. Um, and so, just to give a general overview, this has to do with language and epistemology in general. Um, and so, today, what I want to present is on the question of language and its role in epistemology. That is to say, the role of language in man's capacity to come to the knowledge of things. What is its role? And I think there seems to be a legitimate question with respect to the role of language in epistemology. What exactly is its function? Can it truly serve as a means by which man can know reality outside of himself? Or is language merely a construct mutually agreed upon by humanity with no further epistemological implications? And so, with this question in mind, is man simply to resign himself to mere constructs without furthering any of his knowledge outside of himself, or can he truly use language in order to come to the knowledge of things? And so, someone I want to use heavily today is a philosopher, Walker Percy. And I think this philosopher in particular can prove to be useful in answering this question. So, who is he? Walker Percy is a 20th century philosopher and novelist. He's most known for the novel The Moviegoer, which is a great read. And Walker Percy made significant contributions, not only in literature, but also from a standpoint of philosophy, especially anthropology, just his understanding of the human person. And so, as a philosopher, Walker Percy was heavily influenced by both St. Thomas Aquinas, Soren Kierkegaard, and Charles Peirce. And it's Peirce's influence on Percy that we're going to focus on mainly for today. So what are his contributions in epistemology? So starting with Charles Peirce, he was known for his contribution through semiotics, that is, the science of signs. And again, Walker Percy was heavily influenced by this idea in particular. And it's from this that Walker Percy writes about what he names to be triadic relations. And while triadic relations might primarily deal in the realm of philosophical anthropology, there's a clear connection between the anthropology of man and epistemology, his ability to come to the knowledge of things. Right? So there's a relation between who man is and how he comes to the knowledge of things. There's kind of a groundedness of epistemology in anthropology. And so again, what I want to talk about today, just to focus our thinking, is Percy's epistemological contributions through triadic relations gives an answer to the question of language and epistemology, and gives a concrete and clear role of language in this endeavor. So let's first begin with definitions. What are triadic relations according to Walker Percy? Just to draw from some of his works, the first is an article from a journal in Art of Education called The Fateful Rift, the San Andreas Fault in the Modern Mind. And just to give a brief synopsis of this journal, Walker Percy makes two distinctions between two phenomenon. The dyadic relation and the triadic relation. And so to begin with dyadic relations, he's primarily referring to relations of causality, right? Causal relations only. And what he argues is that the modern world, modern science, the modern mentality is missing another essential aspect of reality through triadic relations. And he's going to point out this relation primarily through human beings in the phenomenon of naming, right? The human being's ability to name things. And so this is a quote from this article. He says, quote, "But there is another kind of event, quite as real, quite as natural a phenomenon, quite as observable, which cannot be so understood, that is, cannot be construed by the dyadic model. It is language. What happens when the child suddenly grasps that the strange little sound cat, an explosion of air between tongue and larynx, followed by a stop of the tongue against teeth, means this cat. Not only this cat, but all cats. Naming is the new event. And of course, soon after the appearance of this naming sentence appear other primitive sentences. Their cat, cat all gone, where cat. This strange capacity seems to be unique in Homo sapiens. End quote. So, again, Walker Percy is pointing out this phenomenon of naming found in human beings, and he argues that this phenomenon is grounded in triadic relations. And so to draw from another work, just to give another example of what he means by triadic relations, he recalls a famous story of Helen Keller. And this is his work toward a triadic theory of meaning. And he says, quote, "Two events occurred in Helen Keller's childhood. One can be reasonably well understood by learning theory. The other cannot. Helen, we know from Miss Sullivan, learned to respond to the word cake spelled in her hand by searching for a piece of cake. Even though we were not present and could not have seen the events inside Helen's head if we had been, we nevertheless feel confident that learning theory can give a fairly adequate account of the kind of events which occurred. B.F. Skinner would have had no difficulty explaining what happened, and most of us would find this explanation useful. But a second event occurred. One day, Helen learned in great excitement that the word water spelled in one hand was the name of the liquid flowing over the other hand. She then wanted to know the names of other things. Theorists of language behavior have been unable to give a coherent account of this event. When one tries to fit this triadic event onto a dyadic model, queer things happen." End quote. So, in light of this account, Percy is going to define triadic relations as, quote, "The heart of the matter is a throwing together, one entity throwing together two others. In this case, cat the creature and cat the sounding image." So this is from another example, but on the next slide we'll have a breakdown of what this definition is. Right, and so the slide says the act by which an object is coupled with a symbol or sign that describes the object itself. Okay, and so in the diagram on the PowerPoint slide, we have a triangular relation here. And so we have the sign user, in other words, the person that couples both the object, right, the external object outside of the coupler himself, or the symbol, and the symbol, which is bound up with the object. And when we talk about human beings, we're talking about an object external to the human person, coupled with a name for the object used by the human person, used by the namer. And so that is what is meant by triadic relation. And so with this understanding of triadic relations, now we can turn to the question of how do triadic relations apply to the question of language and epistemology? What is its role? What is the role of naming? And it seems that Percy's account of this phenomenon can provide an answer. And so this is, again, another quote returning to his article in the San Andreas Fault. Quote, "The triadic event always involves meaning, and a meaning of a special sort. The copula is, spoken or implied, is nothing less than the tiny triadic lever that moves the entire world into the reach of our peculiar species." And he continues, "Indeed, it may well turn out that consciousness itself is not a thing, an entity, but an act, the triadic act by which we recognize reality through its symbolic vehicle." And so the name or word associated with the object in question is not divorced from the object itself, but also makes up that which is essential to the object. To put it in other words, language is used in order that man might come to a deeper knowledge and understanding of that which is outside of himself. Okay, but why? In order for that which is outside of man, right, what's external to man, he must take in what he is outside of himself. But how does he do this? And so when we talk about the phenomenon of naming, man is able to come to the knowledge of the object in an immaterial manner. Okay, and Percy is going to write about this in The Fateful Rift, right, this article. He notices that the problem with naming in reference to science is that it's immaterial. And so because of this, right, because of this idea of naming and immateriality, it flies in the face of modern sensibility. But at the same time, there are deeper implications. It also bears implications about the understanding of the human person, right? And so when we talk about being able to name things through words that themselves are immaterial, we have to ask, how can man bring about something that is immaterial without having some immateriality to himself as well? This phenomenon may suggest then that man might be a composite of body and soul, material and immaterial, right? Because philosophically speaking, we cannot have something begotten that is in other words, man cannot beget language that is immaterial if he himself is not in some way immaterial himself. And so here we have a sort of point in favor of man having a soul, but also the soul as being immaterial. And so we see that the language ultimately is grounded in the reality of the human person in its fullness. With this grounding, he is also able to understand how language plays a role in epistemology. And so kind of briefly to end, what have others said about this question, right? We have to put Percy in dialogue with other contrasting viewpoints. And so we want to bring up two other philosophers, Wittgenstein and Ayer. And so we first turn to Gallagher, who is most known for his language games, Wittgenstein for language games. And Gallagher, in our textbook for this semester, is going to describe what is meant by language games. And so he says, quote, "To ask a word is similar to asking what a certain piece is in the game of chess. A pawn is simply is what it does in the game of chess. It has no properties occult or latent besides the ones which fit for its role in the game. Analogously, a word is what it does in the game of language," end quote. And so to break this down, for Wittgenstein, words are merely instruments in certain settings that function in the manner desired according to the context in which the word is used. And so Wittgenstein sees words as being placed and situated in certain settings, and these settings or contexts dictate the meaning of the word itself. And so that's Wittgenstein. Ayer, on the other hand, will say this, quote, "The dispute is therefore linguistic, not real. The parties are really disputing as to which is the most appropriate language in which to speak about their experience. Each experiences exactly what the other experiences, but each refers to it in a different way. One way is not wrong, and the other right, since there is no possible test which will ever turn up any difference between them," end quote. And so for Ayer, language seems to carry this insurmountable subjective burden, where on the one hand, experience as described by language cannot be denied its validity, its meaning, but the subjectivity seems to be such that the descriptions vary regardless of common experience, and so we can never come to a common knowledge or a knowledge of things in its entirety and in relation to the experience of others. And so why might these be incorrect, at least in light of what Percy Walker is saying? So generally speaking, it seems that those who believe there are problems with language and epistemology seem to view language as a barrier or obstruction to the coming to the knowledge of things. The barrier seems to be a subjectivity inherent in language at the expense of the objective, that either words are used in such particular circumstances for different ends, or are merely constructs to describe objects in whatever manner desired, that true knowledge of the objective outside of man is truly unattainable. And so how can Percy Walker maybe correct these ideas? And this is to conclude. Walker Percy seems to think that this barrier between the subjective and the objective doesn't exist, right? So again, we see in the triadic relation that there's this binding between the name, this immaterial name, with the objective object in question. again, this is done by the coupler, the human person that has the capacity to name things outside of himself. And again, why does he do this? It provides an immaterial means through which man takes in the material, the external, and is able to come to a deeper knowledge of this. And again, the implications for this are significant. For to take in an object through an immaterial means suggests that there's something about the nature of man that too is immaterial. And so I hope that this presentation has just shed a little bit of light about how man can not only come to the understanding of himself, but how he also comes to a deeper understanding of what is outside of him. Thank you.